Welcome to the Tudor Dixon Podcast. Today, we are going to unpack everything Anheuser-Busch. I know everyone has talked about the Busch family and what's happened over the past, like with the transition of the company and Bud Light and all of this, but we have Billy Busch with us here today, and he is one of the heirs to the iconic Anheuser-Busch empire and the founder of the Busch Family Brewing and Distilling Company. And he also wrote the book Family Reigns, The Extraordinary Rise and Epic Fall of an American Dynasty. Billy, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me on, Tudor.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited because we were just talking about how this is really just a part of American history. Every kid remembers their parents cracking open a beer, watching football, and we all remember the Clydesdale commercials. And honestly, that was one of the things that I think after the whole Bud Light debacle with the Dylan Mulvaney, people were like, bring back the Clydesdales. And you're saying that we will be seeing them more.
Well, I just saw on a commercial the other day that the Clydesdales will be back at the Super Bowl again this year, advertising the beer, probably Budweiser and Bud Light. And I mean, it's been an iconic advertisement for many, many years now. It's won the best commercial in the Super Bowl several times over the past several years. And the Clydesdales are just something that have become a image for people in America that they really know, they understand. It's the strength, it's quality, it's very American, and it's a great brand that my family started, way back when in the 1800s. So yeah, to keep that going, I think is incredible.
Absolutely. So they travel around the country, and every couple of years they come directly to my town, about probably 3 miles down the street from where I am right now. And I've seen them twice now. They're majestic creatures. I mean, it is truly magical. But for you, I mean, you're a professional polo player. You've been around horses your whole life. You've had a obviously very interesting life coming from a family that is so iconic, that has made so much money, had this massive brand. You had a childhood where you lived on a farm, but you had some pretty interesting animals on the farm. So tell us a little bit about when you were growing up. Did you know you were a part of such a iconic family?
Well, we always kind of knew we were a part of something. I will say that. We grew up on a farm, you're right, called Grant's Farm. And my grandfather purchased the land back in the turn of the 20th century, so right around 1900. And it used to be a place where Ulysses S. Grant and his wife, Julia Dent, lived. They lived there for a little while. They actually hand-built a cabin. Ulysses did there on which still stands there on the property today. And so it was in my family for many years. My dad, when he started running the brewery, he was given the property and allowed to live there and really just pretty much take it over and raise all of us on the property. And he decided in 1954 to open Grant's Farm to the public. He got this great idea from one of the baseball players' wives, Red Shandy's wife, who was a great Red Shandy's was a great baseball player for the St. Louis Cardinals, which Dad bought back in 1953 to help sell more Budweiser. And he was given the idea to open Grant's Farm to the public by this young lady, and he did that. And he opened it up, and he wanted then to, of course, advertise his brands there and to make it a wonderful family affair. And he was a great marketer. He understood marketing. He understood that if you really catch a family with kids growing up and you catch them at the right age and you show the brand and you show what's going on and you give them something to do and something to think about and something beautiful, they're probably, when they reach the age to be able to have a beer, they'll consider drinking a Budweiser first. And so we grew up on this farm, and it was an incredible place to grow up. And we did have lots of animals. We had elephants, we had monkeys, we had chimps, we had, you name it, we had buffalo. We raised the Budweiser.
It's not your typical American farm.
Yep, very much so. And it was just a great place to grow up. And we worked on the farm, understanding that we had to keep it maintained and looking beautiful for the public who came in, throughout the summer. Basically, we were open 6 months out of the year, and people would come there to visit and enjoy, of course, the place, and then a cold Budweiser if they were old enough. And, it represented our something even bigger than us, and it represented the company, and that's what we always were part of.
So I would be remiss if I didn't ask. Your father obviously sounds like he was a strong family man. He was into family values, and you said he was a phenomenal marketer. What would he have thought of the Dylan Mulvaney moment that really hurt Bud Light?
Yeah, I think he would have thought pretty much, what common sense tells you, and that is that that the basic drinker of Bud Light and mainstream beers in particular are hardworking American people, mainly blue collar, that like to come home after a hard day's work or spend their weekends drinking something that's satisfying, that they can enjoy, that really refreshes them, and that's what the beer represented, and that was the audience to Bud Light. And to make it a different audience, which the new ownership had done a couple of years ago, was a terrible move, and my dad would have thought the same thing.
I mean, that's kind of common sense. When you say that, I think that, a few years ago, people might have said, oh my gosh, how could you say that? But now the world has kind of switched back to saying, okay, there is a reality that it's okay to market to your audience and not try to create an audience that's not your audience. Because, I mean, it's one thing to reach out, maybe create a new brand, but to take your iconic brand and do that, it seemed weird to all of us. So I appreciate you being willing to come out and say that. But I want to stay on your dad for a minute, because you wrote this book. You talk about your family. I've read some articles that have featured your family, and it sounds like your dad was pretty much always a tough businessman, and kind of had even that same demeanor with the family.
He lived, ate, slept the business. It was that's what he was all about. He loved it. He was very passionate about it. He felt very strongly because he saw how hard his grandfather, who started the company back in the 1800s, worked, and how he built the company, and the innovation that he came with, coming up with refrigeration and with pasteurization in beer, so that they could now transport the beer to further off places. Back then, it was all mainly local brews that you drank, but he was able now to transport his beers because of refrigeration and pasteurization to other places in the country. And he saw how hard he worked, and he saw how hard his father worked, especially during that very difficult time from 1920 to 1933, which was Prohibition, and you couldn't sell alcohol in the United States, and how he worked so hard to keep all 2,000 plus employees employed during that time, which of course was a Great Depression and a very, very difficult time economically. And to keep all the employees going was extremely difficult and extremely hard on his father, which actually caused him to take his life in 1934, so right after Prohibition, because of the pain that he was going through from all the stress during that time. And he saw his brother, his oldest brother, also worked the company during World War II, and how they got the company back and rolling after Prohibition and kept it going through World War II. And so he felt very, very close to it. He felt very responsible for having to keep it going and to make sure it just didn't keep going, but it continued to grow. And during my dad's time, and I got to witness this, which was incredible, it was the greatest growth of Anheuser-Busch. They went from 3 million barrels in sales to about 40 million barrels in sales during his time. He opened up 9 other breweries throughout the United States. He put theme parks like Busch Gardens around a lot of those breweries. He bought the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, and he was involved in everything. And he just loved what he did. My mom stood by his side and worked really hard with their entertaining, and they entertained all the time. They were entertaining suppliers and wholesalers and business associates, and they had a lot of celebrities involved, including Frank Sinatra and many other celebrities who were part of Anheuser-Busch and helping advertise the company. And so they worked incredibly hard, and they loved the business, and they were extremely successful. So I got to watch that, and it was really interesting to watch.
I mean, it sounds fascinating. What was it like when your dad? I mean, did your dad retire? Did he passed away before he retired. How did the passing down of the company go?
Yeah, succession was always interesting. It would go to the most competent son normally, and that's how it was passed down. And that's how it went from Adolphus, my great grandfather, to my grandfather, August Sr., and then to his son, Adolphus Jr., who was the oldest of the two brothers. My dad was the youngest. And then he died prematurely, and then went over to my dad, and he took over the company. And then things got a little awkward. Things got a little different because my dad was running the company, and in 1974, his daughter, his youngest daughter, my sister Christina, was killed in a car accident, and it really took a lot out of my father. And he wasn't making the greatest decisions any longer. But I will say that did not give the excuse for his oldest son, my half brother, August III, to take the company from him the way he did. And he basically formed a coup within the board of directors, and he was able to kick my father out of being the head of the brewery, the CEO and the president, and being replaced by him. So that was a hard time to go through. It caused a lot of separation in the family. But that's kind of how things went. And then of course it went to the next generation, my half brother's son, and that's where it ended. A few years after he took it over, InBev came over and took over the company, and now they own it.
So was there any point when you had involvement with the company? Obviously, you had a company outside of the main corporation, but were you involved? Did you run any part of the business?
I never ran any part of the manufacturing business. It was difficult to do because of the separation in the family. My immediate brothers and sisters kind of knew that we weren't going to have the chance to really become to climb the ladder basically at Anheuser-Busch in the company. And so what we were able to do, I was able to buy a distributorship. So we had a couple distributorships, one in Florida and one in Texas. And I learned the distribution side of the business. So I was not only in the entertainment side of the business when it came to Grant's Farm, but I was also in the distribution side of the business. So I learned a lot about the business that way, going out and selling to retailers and just, basically pushing the beer out there in the market street.
What was it like though when you found out that your nephew was selling the business? I mean, that must be kind of tough to see something that has had 6 generations?
Yeah, it was actually 5 generations, 6 different leaders of Anheuser-Busch leaders that ran Anheuser-Busch, because it crossed over horizontally at one point and then kept going down. So it was 5 generations. I think my nephew, August the 4th, he was a very talented guy. He was also an incredible marketer. He understood the business. He had a lot of charisma. He did have one problem though, and that was he had a drug addiction, and that made it very difficult for him to run the company. I think the competition out there saw an in, like InBev. They saw that they could take over the company, and so they, as hard as my nephew tried to stop it from happening, he really couldn't stop it, because at the end of the day, the stock was kind of floundering. It wasn't moving up. You're responsible to the stockholder, of course, and if the stock's not growing and things aren't going well, and you get this huge price to come in and buy the company, and the stock's going to immediately go up, 20 or 30 points, then it's he was under the pretty much he was under the gun and had to sell the company at that point.
But at that point, the company was still completely family owned.
It wasn't completely. No, it was a public company. Actually, at the end of Prohibition, it became a public company. So it was run by the family, but it was not owned by the family.
So how does that happen once it sells? I mean, what happens to the family? Because you said that there was already kind of this break in the family when your half brother essentially threw your dad out. What were those years like? What happens in a family? Because you had a large family. I mean, your dad had 11 kids, right?
That's correct.
So how does that I mean, you're not just it's not just one person's decision, or like I look at my family, I have a sister and we make our decisions about our parents together, but with 11 kids, I would imagine it's very hard to come to a conclusion of how to handle something like that. And then to have your half brother throw him out, that had to have been a pretty big rift.
Well, there was a big rip. My father went through a very, very difficult time. As I said earlier, he lost his youngest daughter, my sister Christina, in a car accident. That took a lot out of him. It really caused a big friction between my mother and father, and they soon divorced about a year or two after that happened. And during that whole time is when his oldest son, my half brother August the 3rd, was forming a coup and kicking my dad out of the company. And my dad was seriously upset. He came to his 4 sons from my mom. So I was one of them, of course. And he asked us to go meet with August out at the farm. And we actually had 2 farms that abutted each other. And we went to the boundary line, and he was on one side of the fence and we were on the other. I'll never forget. We went out there to meet with August and tell him, how wrong he was, and maybe even it could have gotten physical, because we were very upset, and Dad was at that point really, really upset with his oldest son. And so what ended up was August explained to us that Dad had been going through some difficulties at the brewery. He wasn't making good decisions any longer. We could see Dad slipping at home. At this time, he was already about 78 years old. And we could see him slipping at home a little bit. He wasn't the same. He wasn't as strong. He was crying a lot. He was very upset over losing his daughter. And it was difficult for him to lead this company, which was the number 1 company in the beer industry. And he needed to be on his game all the time, which we saw that he wasn't. And August, I will say, he gave a very good explanation on why he needed to run the brewery, why Dad wouldn't easily step down, because Dad had a big ego, of course, and he wasn't going to just step down and walk away from it. And he made also the argument that he was going to keep the company going, and it was going to be very, very successful under his leadership. And, pretty much all those things did come true. I thought there was going to be more of a fight, an argument. And again, it could have gotten physical. It didn't go down to that, because August was pretty eloquent how he explained it to us, and we really couldn't say anything back to him that we couldn't disagree with so much. And so, so what happened was we didn't talk because it was interesting. My immediate 5 brothers and sisters at the time, we all stuck together with Mom and Dad, and his other 4 kids from previous wives all stuck together. So we completely separated. There were no longer Christmas together, or no longer Thanksgiving together, any of that. So life changed completely at that point when it came to our family dynamic.
How old was your sister when she was in the car accident?
She was 8 years old.
Oh my goodness. How devastating. So was family in the car with her?
Yeah, my brother was in the car with her. Thank God he was thrown out of the car, and he only had scratches on him. And then the chauffeur was in the car with her, and he was killed immediately. She lived on a machine for about a week or so after the accident, but she was completely paralyzed and never regained consciousness, and then she ended up dying.
Oh my goodness. So that was obviously something that tore all of you apart. I mean, that had to have been devastating for everyone. How old were you when this happened with the company?
Yeah, I was 15 years old when my sister was in the car accident. And then again, it was probably a few months after that my half brother formed the coup and kicked my dad out of the brewery. And then my mom and dad argued all the time. My mom was, she didn't want to see him lose the power, and she wanted him to understand that he had 6 other kids that he had to take care of, and that he could not cry over Christina and the whole time. And he needed to pull himself together and be strong through this and get the company back in under his control. And they fought all the time, unrelentlessly. And it just kept going like that. So it spiraled downhill, and pretty soon they ended up getting divorced. So yeah, it was never the same after that point.
Were you the oldest of that family?
No, I had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters and 1 younger brother.
But a lot of responsibility at 15 to go talk to your older half brother about having your father stay in the company.
You know what? We were leaving it more to our oldest full brother, Adolphus. And I know this is a little bit confusing with all the brothers and sisters and half brothers and sisters and what have you. But Adolphus, my oldest full brother, was being also groomed to become a large part of Anheuser-Busch. I remember Dad asking him, not only when he went to college, he worked at the Coors Brewery in Colorado to learn the business while he was going to college. But Dad also had him make speeches for him, make appearances in his place in a lot of instances around the country, which Adolphus did, thinking that he also was going to have a big part of control of Anheuser-Busch, or being a leadership in Anheuser-Busch in some way, shape, or another. And it wasn't guaranteed. Again, the succession wasn't guaranteed to August. It was going to go to the most competent of the descendants. And he so he understood what was going on. He was older. He was about 21 at the time. And we let him, I really thought that there was going to be a more discussion and more volatility at that meeting place at the farm when we met, especially between my oldest brother and August. But again, it turned out where August was able to explain himself very well, and we all kind of understood, and we went back, sat down with Dad. Adolphus explained to him and said, Dad, there's just nothing we can do. August has already taken it over. And, maybe it is time that you retire. You're still going to be able to be the head of the Cardinals, the president of the Cardinal baseball team. And, that's kind of where we are now. But, yeah, it was, to this day, I still look at it like, there could have been a much better way for August to have handled himself with our father and work that succession deal out. And I just think he handled that poorly. But I will say he did run the brewery very, very well. Under his leadership, Anheuser-Busch took off. He came up with Bud Light, and we ended up getting over 50% market share here in the United States. So 1 out of every 2 beers that was sold under him in the United States was an Anheuser-Busch beer. And the company did incredibly well for many years under his leadership.
But after that, after the coup, after he took over, did any of your brothers, if your full brothers, ever work there again?
No, nobody ever really worked at Anheuser-Busch. One of my brothers, my older brother Peter, he worked a little bit at as a regional manager in Oklahoma for a little while for Anheuser-Busch before purchasing a distributorship down in Florida. And you said earlier, I played polo. We were on a polo team. We ended up purchasing my 2 brothers and I, and along with a couple other partners, purchased a distributorship in Florida also. And then we ended up moving from that distributorship to one down in Texas, a great big one in Houston, Texas. And I moved down there and worked at that distributorship and learned the distributing business forward and backward, and loved the business. And it's always been in my blood, and here we are today, and we're still in the business. And I'm asking myself once in a while, why am I still in this business? Because there's over 10,000 breweries out there right now. Many of them are closing down. People aren't drinking beer like they used to, but I still love the business, and I feel
Why
a
do you
part
think
of it.
that is? Why has that changed?
Well, I think the millennials and the Gen Zs have gone. I think they're becoming more health conscious. When we were growing up, and I was part of the baby boomers, we looked at beer as the alcohol of moderation. If you're going to drink alcohol, the best drink you could drink would be beer, because it was always the easiest on your system, and it had health benefits to it with the hops and the barley and everything. And it wasn't that high in alcohol. So we looked at it like it was a great pastime, a great drink to have. It's not going to get you all messed up, and it's something you can enjoy socially when you're out. And and everybody thought that, and for the most part during those days, people were drinking way more beer. But nowadays, I'll tell you, I don't know if it's if it's cannabis,
Right.
or some of these other things that are out there that people can enjoy now, but people are more health conscious, and they're even saying that beer now is not the healthiest thing for you in the world. I mean, back in the day, the physicians were saying that a couple beers a day there was a great health benefit to that. Now they're trying to take that away. So I just think that more people are health conscious today than ever before.
So let me ask you, you talk about this as being the rise and fall of an empire, really. So what do you really see as the fall? Was it the moment that you had that discussion with August? Was that like the beginning of what you felt like was the fall, because it was kind of a separation of family behind the scenes?
That's a really good question, Tudor. I really think that, yes, you're right. I think if you go back in history and you look at how close family members were, when it came to my grandfather, my great grandfather Adolphus, who had 13 kids. Some of them didn't live that long. They died early back in those days in the 1800s. But him and his wife were always very close, and they ran the business, and they knew exactly who to run the business after they resigned or were ready to retire. And that happened with Adolphus when he handed it down to August Sr., who was the most competent and willing to take it over, although he had to figure out a lot of things I talk about in the book. He wanted to be a rancher, and so his father sent him out to New Mexico to learn the ranching business, and then he came back and decided he wanted to be in the brewing business after all. And then when my dad's father, my grandfather August Sr., who was very close to his wife, they had 5 kids. 2 of them were sons, 3 were daughters. And my dad was the youngest of the 2 sons and the 4th youngest of all the kids. And so his oldest brother was very competent, and it made sense because he was older to take over the brewery. He took it over under the eye of my grandfather until he died, and then he ran the company. And then he passed away early from a sickness, and it went over to my dad, and my dad took it over. But that's when things, I think, got a little bit different. Now, my dad, he had actually 4 different wives during his time, and he had kids from 3 of his wives. And I think, family is very, very important. And I will say that if between half brothers and half sisters and all that, it can get even more competitive than it would be in a family that's all unified, right? It's full brothers and sisters. And I think that made a difference. I really do. And I think the fact that his oldest son, August, was, I would say, a little leery of his half brothers and sisters, and understanding that they could actually take the company over when it should be rightfully his. I think he jumped in there to ensure that he would get it and that nobody else would.
Hmm.
And I think he took it from Dad. When he took it from Dad, it's ironic how things happened. He ended up running the company, as I said, very well. He did great things with it. He grew the business. But then he had a son that he handed it down to. And it probably wasn't well, it definitely wasn't the best idea to hand it to this son because of his addiction problem. And the rest is pretty much history. When our competition grew in Europe and Brazil and Belgium, and the company got very big, and all of a sudden Anheuser-Busch was no longer the big fish in the sea any longer. They were no longer the number one brewing beer business in the world. Now a company called InBev had outgrown them on a world scale. That it gave them the ability to take over Anheuser-Busch. And when they saw that it was not being run completely well by the leadership, that they then had the ability to go in and take it over.
Wow. And how old was August's son when that happened?
He would have been, I think, let's see. So that was 2008. Let's see. We're talking 17 years ago. So he would have been in his 30s. Yeah.
So we'll just end on this. What is the status of the family today? Are there family gatherings? Do you see each other, or how did things end up?
I'm not close to my brothers and sisters any longer. Grant's Farm became kind of a dividing place for us. My dad, in his will, wanted to keep Grant's Farm in the family and wanted one or more of us to keep it going in the family. I offered to buy Grant's Farm when my brothers and sisters were trying to sell it, or we all wanted to sell it. I offered to buy it to keep it in the family as Dad's wishes. I had a beer business. I was going to put a brewery on there and use Grant's Farm, similar to what Dad did, as like an amusement park or theme park to advertise our beers, our new beers that we had out. And it made perfect sense. I had the ability to buy it. My brothers and sisters did not want to see one Busch owning it. They wanted all of us to either sell it or there was no other option at that time. Actually, we all had to sell it. I said, no, that's not what Dad wanted. He wanted one of us to keep it in the family. I'm doing that by making you this offer. Well, it ended up where we had a trustee at the time, Wells Fargo. They gave us a deadline on when, on making an offer on the place. We made the offer on the place. I did, my family and my immediate family, and they ended up at the final seconds. Well, actually, after the deadline, they came back with an offer. My brothers and sisters did, to buy it from me. So I ended up selling that to them, but it left a bad taste in our mouth, and so they're unfortunately, we just don't even talk anymore.
Wow. I mean, really, the rise and fall. What a wild story. I guess with all of these businesses and this responsibility, it really can cause a divide. I'm so sorry to hear that. But I mean, you have an amazing family. Like I said, I saw you out one night and I saw all your kids there, and it looked like you have your own little family has been, which is not little because I think you have 7 kids of your own, don't you?
That's correct. Yes.
Yes. So you have created quite a little legacy of your own. And I hope that is something that you are very proud of.
Well, I am absolutely proud of my wife and us and me. What we were able to accomplish with our kids. We raised 7 beautiful, wonderful kids that we're all very proud of. They're all productive. They all love the country. They all are good in their society and want to do good things in life. And so, what more can you ask for? We really appreciate the fact that we have them. And yeah, I think, in any family, especially when you're given a lot, especially when you have a lot, there's going to be some tragedy. But you know what? It could be worse. And the great thing about it is, we're all still alive, and maybe one day we can work things out. But it's difficult when you're given so much. All I can say to people out there is, when you leave your legacy to your kids, make sure that you put it all in black and white. Don't leave them anything that they can have a big fight over, in a way that they can have a big fight over. Just put it all in black and white, and that way you keep the lawyers out of it too.
Yeah, I mean, great advice, because honestly, I've seen it in my own family with extended family members who don't speak. I think that's probably the most sound advice I've heard on the podcast so far, because people, they give advice on parenting and everything all the time, but really that's the moment where when you are gone, you want to make sure your family is still together. And the best way to do that is to clear all of that up before you're gone, because it's amazing how people can just go after each other.
100%. There's no doubt about it, and that's why I've worked on our estate planning, and I take a very close interest in it, because to me, family is everything, and I want to see my kids always stick together. That's the most important thing there is.
Well, I so appreciate you coming on and sharing today and being vulnerable with us. Your family story is fascinating. I think all of us have kind of looked in from the outside our entire lives at this amazing company that we all saw every Sunday or Monday night in our houses. And it became a part of, after a hard day's work in the lawn, coming in and cracking a beer. I mean, you have been a part of most Americans' lives. So Billy Bush, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate it, Tudor. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening to this podcast. For this one and others, go to TudorDixonPodcast.com, the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time. Have a blessed day.